I think you have to go back a step and say, what are your values as a parent? What do you want to give your kids?
Hello, and welcome to Parenting for Thought, the podcast that's still trying to figure out what kind of cheesy intro it wants to have. I am your host, Emry Kettle, child behavior specialist, and I'm going to try to contain my excitement, or maybe not, with introducing Dr. Anna Colton, who is out there in the world talking about things that really need to be talked about. And I'm so glad she's doing it. But she can explain herself and her work better than I can. So, Dr. Anna, who are you? What do you do? What's your work?
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Emry. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and I have worked in eating disorders for over 2 decades now. It's a long time. And although we have all sorts of treatments for eating disorders specifically, I think that we need to take a step back and look at how we talk to children about food rather than just waiting to fix a disorder when it crops up, because we as parents, or indeed anyone who looks after kids, have this amazing opportunity to lay down foundations that are protective against. Now, it doesn't mean that if you have, really protective foundations and a great relationship with food, that you will, by definition, therefore not develop an eating disorder, because they're multifactorial and lots of life can happen and lots of things can happen, and you still may. But it's protective. Mm-hmm. And so I've just written a book called How to Talk to Children About Food, which is about all of that. And now, as well as, clinical work, I do talk a lot about how to talk to children about food, how to protect from an eating disorder, how to create a good relationship with food so that, they can lay down the foundations in a better way.
Incredible. This is life-preserving stuff here. I mean, really and truly. Now, let's make sure that we're all on the same page, because there's eating disorders and there's disordered eating. Could you speak to that a little bit and just make sure that, like, all of us, the listeners, the viewers, that everybody's on the same page about, like, practically what does that look like a person with an eating disorder? What does their day look like versus somebody who experiences disordered eating?
I mean, that's a great question. And the answer is there's a spectrum of both. Mm-hmm. Now, when we say an eating disorder, it just means that you can tick off the diagnostic criteria in one of the diagnostic and statistical manuals of mental health. So that's either DSM-5 or ICD-11. They're the two big psychiatric manuals. To gain a diagnosis, you have to meet the criteria. You can have very close to an eating disorder, disordered eating, which just misses one of the criteria, and therefore you don't have the diagnosis. So disordered eating can be anything from just, skipping the odd meal, but not being too worried and being pretty healthy and robust, to, something akin to anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder. Where it falls, it's the same symptoms, it's many of the same thoughts, it's many of the same behaviors, it's many of the same emotions, and it's often, the kind of very similar in using food to manage emotions or using food to manage life. It is just that diagnostic criteria piece that differentiates. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. If that's clear enough.
Well, and I think it's so important to remember this spectrum piece, where just because you can tick off all the diagnostic criteria doesn't mean that you will always tick off all the diagnostic criteria. And just because you don't yet tick off all the diagnostic criteria doesn't mean that you never will. It's a very fluid thing.
Yeah, but for me, it's not even about diagnostic criteria, actually, other than trying to differentiate between the two. For me, it's that whether or not you tick off the diagnostic criteria, if you're struggling with food, if you're using food, that is not a great place to be. And your symptoms and your feelings and your thoughts require attention and treatment, irrespective.
Also, I'm just thinking about, how I'll encounter parents who are like, Well, it's just good practice. And it's just, this isn't there's this big obsession with the word healthy. It's just not healthy to do this or that. And so they set these rules for themselves because they want to be healthy. And my thought is always, if it's that present in your mind, if you're so concerned, that feels less, and I will distinguish emotionally healthy to me. What are your thoughts on something like that?
It's really tricky because in the world of food, the language we use is really important. And in the world of food, I kind of think the word healthy is not a helpful word often, because there's a lot of value attached to that. If you're healthy, you're making the right choices, they're good choices, which indicates that you can make the wrong choices and there can be bad choices. And then there is value attached to being healthy. So I'm never sure about that. In fact, with food, I'm sure I'm not a fan of that. In terms of rules, we all kind of have guiding principles of life, don't we? And our guiding principles you can see as rules or not. So it kind of depends how it manifests and how strict and how closely anyone wants to adhere to the rules they set for themselves about whether it's healthy or not. I would say if someone sets themselves at 10 o'clock bedtime when they're getting up at 6, it's nailed it, if they can stick to it. If someone says they never eat an entire food group unless there's an allergy, I would say that's not entirely healthy. So I think it's really important to be specific in all of this.
Yeah. So, all right, let's bring it down to the parenting level, right? So most of the parents who I encounter, when they're asking me about how to support them in supporting their child's nutritional health, the number one thing that they are very concerned with is limiting sweets. And I've done some of my own research on this. So I know, this much. For listeners, I'm holding my fingers just a little bit apart. And as a fat person, I deal with this in my own world. Now, there's a million reasons why somebody's body might be a fat body. But, and this is a whole nother type of discussion, right? We could so get into the weeds of fat phobia on this topic. For the sake of time, we won't. But suffice it to say, I know a thing or two about food and how it works in the body. I am by no means an expert. But what I have learned, all roads lead back to that our choices around food are so largely emotional, and or the way that we talk about it is so largely emotional, and the effect that has on us is worth way more of my time and energy than, oh gosh, am I going to choose this vegetable or that vegetable or limit this sweet or that sweet? How I think about it, how I feel about it matters so much more.
Yeah.
So what
Absolutely.
does that look like for parents when the kid's going, mommy, I want this candy, mommy, I want this brownie? What does that look like to a parent who has 3 seconds to respond before trying to get back to work or clean up or do laundry?
I mean, that's an enormous question.
This is a very serious podcast, Dr. Anna.
Yeah. So I think you have to go back a step and say, what are your values as a parent? What do you want to give your kids? For me, there is a reality that we live in a world where at some point children will meet sugar, Now, they don't need to be offered it in the first year or so when they're not going to meet it, or the first 2 years when they're not going to meet it. But given that there's a reality that at some point they will, you want them to be able to experience it at home, where you can see, where you can help, where you can help them to self-regulate. You can teach them to self-regulate, because for everything that comes out of my mouth on this podcast or in my book or on my socials or whatever, I don't actually believe in unlimited sugar, and I don't believe in unlimited anything. I do think it's good to have boundaries. I do think they're really important. I do think regulating food is really important in certain instances. But I think what becomes problematic is that children will be exposed to it. They are likely to like it because it's tasty. Sweet food is tasty, but also there is an evolutionary perspective on this, which is that when we were back in the day hunter-gathering and foraging for food, sweet foods are very rarely, if ever, poisonous. And so they're safe. And also, sweet foods are usually the most energy-dense foods. And so when we were hunter-gathering, we had a preference for finding sweet foods. They kept us safe and they fueled us.
We were mostly fruit eaters at one point, weren't we? And that's a sweeter food.
Right. So there is an evolutionary component to having a sweet tooth, to liking or having a preference for sweet foods. So I think, that's rarely talked about, and it's really important. There is a biological component to hunger, because if we don't eat, ultimately we die. So it's a safety mechanism to feel very hungry or to feel hungry. That's the body saying you need fuel. And I think we have to put those two things in the mix when we're talking about sweet foods, along with then the emotional, which is that if you always say, if you have very strong, as a parent, very strong views that all sugar is bad and your children must never eat it, then you're going to find yourself either using fear or which will make them very anxious. And anxiety linked with food brings around a poor relationship with food and increases the risk of disordered eating. Or they'll develop a scarcity mindset around sugar, which is that it's not allowed. So whenever they have it, whenever they find it, they have to have as much as possible because they don't know when they're next going to be allowed it. And that leads to a poor relationship with food, and that leads to a greater risk of disordered eating.
Yeah.
So with all of those things in mind, and I realize that, this is a very slow answer to your question. I think it is important. I think it's really important for parents to have a nuanced approach. I think nuance gets lost in conversations around food because it's tricky, isn't it, to kind of hold nuance and to hold kind of, we don't want too much, but a little bit. But how do we say no? How do we say no in a good way? Blah, blah, blah. So I think for a parent, if you don't want your child to have the sugary food at that moment, it's okay to say no. It's about how you say no. So instead of, ideally you don't say, no, it's really bad for you, or no, sugar is poison, or sugar is toxic, which I hear more and more now. And I think and instead you just go, no, we're not having a brownie now, or we'll have a brownie after dinner, or we'll have a brownie with dinner, or we've had some of this today, we'll have some more another day. And be totally matter of fact. So you don't link it to a value, you don't link it to a moral. If you set kids up and you say, for example, sugar is bad, then it's not unusual for kids to think that if they like sugar, they are bad. Now, we really don't want that association either. So it's not the whether, it's the how for me.
I'm so struck by how this really, when you filter it down, it comes down to communication. And this is what I run into with parents the most, is that they are not confident in their ability to set a boundary or to communicate a boundary. They don't know how to do it without logicking their child. They don't know how to do it without saying, and this is why, and therefore that makes you understand me more, and now I have your buy-in. Your 2-year-old, your 3-year-old is not going to be magically on your side because you said 10 more words. In fact, it's going to make them not want to listen to you because they don't care. They just want a clear answer.
Right. But also, if we're talking as young as 2 or 3, actually, they don't have the cognitive development yet to understand all of that.
Yep.
They just need yes, no, not now, later.
Yes.
Without anything else. The way we teach about, and I think in fairness, the desire to explain comes partly from not wanting to disappoint one's child, because as parents, we don't like to cause upset, really. But also from a desire to educate around nutrition. A lot of parents feel very strongly they need to educate their kids around nutrition. again, it's the how.
Yeah.
And it's about being age appropriate and developmentally appropriate in when you do it and how you do it and the language you use.
I've got a great story for this. And it's so funny because in the last episode I recorded, Al was saying how I talk about Magnus every episode, and he's so right, because here I am talking about Magnus again. For those who don't know, which if you've listened to any episode, you should know who Magnus is, but he's my kiddo I take care of a couple times a week. And we have snack time almost every time that we're together, right? And sometimes it's dinner time. And this latest time we had dinner together, so it was chicken nuggets and peas, and then mom had just made some cookies a couple days prior, so there were still some cookies left. And he was so excited to have those cookies. So we're having our little chicken nuggets and peas, and he wasn't all too interested in the peas, and he's asking me, Emry, can I have the cookie now? And I thought, wow, I have like 100 different options of how I can respond to this. But I'm going to stick to my values and I'm going to teach. So I said, well, you're absolutely going to get to have that. Like, that's a yes already. Cookies are happening. There's no condition, It wasn't that he had to have 2 bites of peas before having the cookie. So it's just a very simple, oh, sure, absolutely, you can have that cookie, bud. Also, in addition to that cookie, we want to make sure that your body gets all the vitamins and the nutrients that it needs. The chicken nuggets gave you some nutrients that are great for your body. The peas also have really good nutrients for your body. And that cookie has nutrients too. The presence of sugar doesn't negate that. And sugar itself is something that our bodies use. So I just simply said, well, the chicken nugget nutrients, the pea nutrients, and the cookie nutrients, your body needs all of those. So let's get some pea nutrients into your body, and then you can have the cookie nutrients. And he was just like, oh, well, okay, cool. And he had a couple bites of peas, and he was so proud of himself because he had understood that he gave his body nourishment, nutrition, vitamins.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was truly, it was healing for me as a child who was not well taken care of. Right? This was that moment where I got to parent him in a way that I was not parented. And I bear the scars of a rough relationship with food. I know what that's like from being little until now. I have had to claw my way to emotional health around my nutritional health. So being able to give that to Magnus in a 30-second conversation, knowing the weight that will carry moving forward in his life, incredible.
Because a relationship with food is lifelong. We all have one.
Yeah.
So the foundations are rocky. It's a much bigger journey to get yourself into a good place when you're older. That's why the foundations are so important.
Yeah. Yeah. So like what if a parent's gut reaction is to reach for that, no, because I care about your body and I don't want you to have so many sweet things, is there a simple tweak? Because it's too much to ask for somebody to like figure out their values around food when they've got generational traumas happening too, right? that's
you can just say no. And if it's quite straightforward. No, or not now. It just needs to be that sometimes it's a yes. Because if it's never a yes, then you get into the scarcity mindset. And that's when kids will go seek it elsewhere, or when they do get offered it at parties or at play dates or at friends or somewhere else, they're more likely to overeat. And actually, you don't want that. What you really want is for kids to be able to kind of have a couple of bites of a lolly or a chocolate bar and go, I've had enough, and leave it. And the only way to achieve that is through food neutrality, when food is just, every food is given its proper name: broccoli, chocolate, apples, yogurt, banana, chicken, sweets or candy, crisps, burgers, whatever, peanuts, raisins, everything has its name, rather than, this is super healthy and this is junk, rubbish, toxic, poison, crap. So,
poison.
That's very.
Can you imagine saying the word poison around food?
There are a lot of very strong beliefs around food, and I hear it not infrequently. Sugar is poison, ultra processed foods are poison. There's nuance, because there's nuance. It's not quite so black and white. So a food neutral approach will allow much more for your child to tune into their body, for you to go, did you notice when you ate that you had this massive energy, then you crashed and you felt really tired after. Or, so we need some other food alongside it. And that's why we don't do it all the time. So it just allows for much more conversation and many more educational openings, if that's what you really want to do as a parent, to point out how it impacts their body and their mood and their tiredness or energy levels.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But food neutrality, I think, is absolutely so important.
Yeah, again, as somebody who has trauma around this topic, I have to agree. I'm thinking about the way that I was raised, and the kinds of conversations that we had around food, or the lack of conversation around food, and the shame cycles. And that doesn't come from nowhere, right? Our parents were raised a certain way, and their parents were raised a certain way. This is generational, isn't it?
Yeah, we do. We do. I mean, it's intergenerational. And unless you become aware of your own baggage, you will, without even realizing, without choice, inadvertently gift it to your children. It's just the way we do it. And we do it with all sorts of things. And it's not that makes you bad or anything, but it's just, it's so important to be aware of what's your baggage, what have you been passed, and then to work out, what do you really believe? What do you want to pass on? And if you've got a tricky relationship with food yourself, unless you work on that, your children will pick it up somehow, either by copying the way you eat or you respond to food, or by what you say. So we are doomed, or destined, not doomed. We are destined, I think, unless we become aware of our stuff, to communicate it to our kids and pass it down the generations.
Mm-hmm.
Breaking the cycle is really hard work. It requires a lot of self-examination and courage to change patterns.
Yeah. So you're a clinical psychologist. You know a thing or two about a thing or two.
Nice. I like that. I might have to steal that.
Please do. I mean, I know I do not have a clear idea of how many families, how many children are approaching that tipping point. How often do you see this in your practice, or do you exclusively work with this population now? How prevalent is this?
So it's a great question. I don't exclusively anymore. Much of my career has been exclusively with this population. So I am actually skewed in my perception of the prevalence of anorexia, because I've done a lot of anorexia in my career, and I still do. I'm skewed in the prevalence of eating disorders generally, because that has been my career. I do other stuff now as well, but it is sadly normal for teenage girls in particular to have a bit of a troubled relationship with their body, to feel uncomfortable in their body, and to use food. Does that mean it'll turn into disordered eating or an eating disorder? Not always. Might it? For sure. And it makes sense that there's a troubled relationship, that through adolescence, the body is changing so profoundly in so many ways. The brain is rewiring. There's a lot of development, neurological, physiological, sexual, emotional. So it's a really tumultuous time on all those fronts. But over the last 30 years, we have seen an increase in this kind of what now I think is almost normal body image dissatisfaction, which wasn't quite so normal or prevalent 20, 30 years ago. We live in a culture that is ruled by diet culture, and diet culture is the belief that, thin is good, fat is bad, that you are personally responsible for your weight, shape, size, and that your weight, shape, size is entirely 100% in your control. So that's the culture in which we live. And those things are all incorrect, actually. And so it's really hard. And young people now are, in fact, all of us, but particularly young people, are bombarded 24 hours a day with limitless rolling images that perpetuate diet culture beliefs of the ideal body, the ideal workout plan, the ideal, weight and shape, the belief that if you just follow this diet, you will be happy. All of your desires, all of your goals will be achieved. Anybody can get to this if they just work hard enough. Now, all of that is, of course, flawed and incorrect. But the messaging that comes from really most of society and from all angles is so incorrect that it perpetuates what is already a difficult time in adolescence. And it's not just for girls, it's for boys as well.
All genders. All genders.
All genders, all people, all... it's universal.
Yes.
And it's pervasive.
Yes. As I'm listening to you, I'm remembering how, and I've talked about this on my podcast before, that I was diagnosed with uterine cancer in 2020. I'm okay now, thank goodness. But the day that I was told, and I'm sitting across from an oncologist who I had never met before and who didn't know me, who had just looked at a chart. And I'm sitting there, I was 34 at the time, and I said, how does a 34-year-old get cancer? And she goes, well, it's connected to your weight. And I looked at her and I was like, you're telling me, in my head, it's just all swirling, right? And I'm going, okay, it's the middle of a global pandemic. I'm not even vaccinated yet. And this whole thing, it's all just crashing down. And you're telling me I got cancer because I'm fat? That is just... I'm not a scientist and I know that's not right. Tell me it's related to cortisol and, tell me that it's something that is scientifically sound. But to just tell me it's due to my weight, this is what is out there. This is the medical bias. These are people who should know better than they do, and they still don't. And I'm thinking about how parents are, I have yet to meet a parent who is not well-meaning in their pursuit of some sort of health with their child. And they're getting this information from all these different places, especially social media, and from medical professionals. And it's still so skewed. How difficult must that be to know who to trust?
It is incredibly difficult, and you can't expect parents to go and read the research articles.
No, they're busy. They got laundry to do and dinner to make.
But also that's just, most people don't do that.
No.
And what would you take from it anyway? So there's a lot of misinformation, which is a real problem. But there's also, everything is multifactorial. There's almost never just one cause.
Right.
And to assume that there is well, unhelpful at best.
Spoken like a therapist. Is this a helpful thought or an unhelpful thought?
Unhelpful.
Unhelpful. Yeah. You know what I would love for our listeners to carry with them? And I think this reminder is always so important. What about if we make a mistake? What if we say the icky thing, Dr. Anna? What if I told my kid, no, you cannot have that sweet. You've had enough sweets today.
Okay. So, and? Doesn't matter. You said the thing. And in fact, if you've just said you've had enough sweets today, I don't know what the icky thing is really, because, you wouldn't want your child to eat exclusively lettuce. That wouldn't be good for them, you know. And I get it would be an unusual scenario where your child only wanted to eat lettuce, but actually, I hope you'd be really worried because they wouldn't have enough nutrition. So, if you say you can't eat that, it's rubbish, you just repair. It's not about the icky thing. It's about what you do with it next. It's not about the rupture or the botch or the error. It's about how you address it thereafter. It's not even if you say something that's, really unhelpful for your child. Sometimes we do. Sometimes as a parent myself, sometimes you're tired, you're irritable, you've had enough, you just want them to stop nagging. You say things.
Yeah.
It's not edifying. It doesn't feel good. Don't cover yourself in glory. You go, I would, really, really caution against this at work. And it's just come out of my mouth 3 times in a row, whatever it may be. Because, of course, I've done it too. But the thing is not about the rupture. It's not about the rupture. It's not about the botch. It's about what do you do with it? How do you repair it? And that's teaching that is an amazing life skill to say, you know what, I just said this, but I'm sorry about that. It's totally wrong. Or that wasn't the right word. And I said the food was rubbish. The food's not rubbish. It's just not got as much of a varied nutritional. It just doesn't have as much variation in the nutrition, and the energy doesn't last as long. And we just need other stuff to go with it. And I used shorthand and sorry about that, and move on. It's fine. Doesn't matter. It's never too late to repair. Just get on with the repair and feel pleased that you have an opportunity to model repair, because that's the gift.
So, Anna, are you telling me that it's okay for parents to be human? That can't be right.
Well, if that's not right, I'm really in trouble.
I love it. It's anybody who has followed my work for any length of time or has worked with me one-on-one knows that I love talking about how nothing is black and white, how everything is gray. What I like to say is that black and white can sometimes be helpful to orient us so that we understand where we are in the gray, but real life is lived in the gray. And even using my example with, how I talk to Magnus about the chicken nutrition, the pea nutrition, and the cookie nutrition, just because I was able to teach and share those beautiful moments with him, that doesn't mean that he is therefore going to have an amazing relationship with food and be, perfectly balanced in his nutritional needs for the rest of his life. It's just like you said, we're laying down a foundation of preventive measures. And that is the best we can do. We cannot do more.
No,
we can't fix, we can't control.
We can notice if there's a problem, and the sooner we notice, the better, and the quicker we go for specialist help, the better. I really, I think we can do that. Nobody like me will be sorry to see somebody who is actually okay. We'll be delighted to say, come back if there's a problem, or let's check in a month, or this is great. Thank you for coming early. So attentive, really helpful, marvelous.
Amazing.
Amazing. Doesn't happen very often, but occasionally, and it's a gift. More often than not, we see people where it's become entrenched, and it takes a long time to work with, and it's a very painful process, and it's very anxiety provoking. And I couldn't agree with you more on black and white for what it's worth, obviously. But
Thanks.
What I would say is that that black and white feel more certain, so they feel cognitively easier. But actually, they make life more stressful.
You're talking about how by the time that people come to you, the stuff is entrenched. It's exactly the same for me with behavioral issues. Parents fight so hard to keep in homeostasis, right? And it typically takes a lot to get them to go, okay, fine, I give in. I'll get somebody else to come help. What are some signs? What would a parent notice that would make them go, we could probably benefit from a check-in with someone? What would that look like?
Anything that feels, as a parent, you know your child. So any changes that feel significant or anything that starts making you go, this has been around for about a month now, I'm not feeling very comfortable with it, doesn't seem to be improving, or we seem to be in a much more, my child is in a much more, they're restricting much more, or seems that there's binging and hiding of food, or, they don't eat for days and then they do eat, or there's weight loss, or there's significant weight gain that's unexpected, please come see us. Or even if you just have a niggle that all is not well, come. There's nothing wrong with it. As I say, the best, maybe worst, but the best scenario, the best outcome is that someone like me goes, I think all's good. Actually, it's going to pass. It's just, a growth spurt, or it's, there's been a lot of stress at school and mood has been a bit low, but it seems that things are improving. So just keep an eye and come back if you need. Great. Marvelous.
Also, what a beautiful thing to model to your child that, like, hey, a mental health check-in, like, you're worth that. And it's okay to just notice within yourself what is happening and notice your patterns and notice your tendencies and go talk to somebody about it and just like make sure that it's okay. Your peace of mind. I mean, that's gold.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that you often notice is if you've got a child in puberty and puberty seems to stop. So if periods stop or then you need to go check it. You do. And there's nothing to be worried about. The other thing is it'll depend on your relationship with your child, right?
Sure.
Because if you've got a very good, solid relationship, you can ask these questions yourself and it won't feel difficult. But if for whatever reason that is too difficult for you to do, go find someone who can help you out with that. Great. I mean, we want to reduce the stigma, and shame is, oh my goodness, the most difficult emotion there is. So when shame creeps in, either for a parent or for a child, no thanks. We want to get rid of that as much as we can, because shame really breeds with secrecy and silence. And shame is not about I've done something bad. Shame is about I am bad. So we don't want anyone to feel that. And when that is related to food, it's really, really, really difficult and painful. And so I'd rather prevent shame wherever I could. And blame.
I can literally tell you, I have 2 stories from my childhood that were the instigators of the shame cycle around food for me. I remember them both vividly, as though they happened this morning. And I remember they both involved my mother and my sister, and I was the youngest by 8 years. So, if I was 7 or 8 around the time that I was doing these behaviors, and my sister was well into her teenage years. And I remember my mother and my sister looking at each other and giggling because they thought what I was doing was funny. I know that they weren't trying to be mean to me. I can see that now as an adult. But in that moment, I was so ashamed. And this is not to say that they did wrong. They didn't have the tools or any of that to know what was happening in me. But that's how deep this stuff goes, and that's how long this lives.
Yeah, and it sticks and it stays. And then it runs us.
Yes.
Because we want to avoid ever feeling like that again.
Oh, shame is awful.
Awful. So, and I'm acutely aware, when I fundamentally what I talk about is yes, I talk about relationships with food and eating and all of that, but it's parenting. And I would hate for any parent to feel shame, because shame stops change, and shame stops development, and shame stops compassion. And so no new pathways open up when you're riddled with shame. So shame is so destructive. I don't want anyone to feel that.
No, it's brutal. Are you familiar with the show Big Mouth?
No.
It's an adult animated series that centers around a bunch of kids who are going through puberty. And I find the show charming and hilarious, totally vulgar, but very raw. And one of the characters on the show is the shame wizard. And when I tell you that I felt so seen by this shame wizard character, and I'm going, oh my God, if I had had a cheesy, cheeky show like this when I was a teenager, to go, oh, that is exactly what's happening in me right now.
Exactly.
Amazing.
And anything that destigmatizes.
Yes. Warning, it is a very vulgar show, but it is so real and raw and relatable. In our home, we love it. We are very pro ending stigma. So yeah.
Very, very pro that, yeah.
So when there's any sort of shame, we talk about the shame wizard. And of course, the show makes him the butt of the jokes. So it's very fun to be able to kind of pull it out and make fun of our own shame wizards.
For sure. For sure.
So, Dr. Anna Colton, if there was one thing you wish someone listening would walk away today knowing, what would that be?
There is nothing that makes an eating disorder worth it. Literally nothing. So, do all you can in a kind of balanced way to lay the foundations for a great relationship with food, happy family meal times, reduce the stress and the anxiety around food and eating. And yeah, nothing is not worth it.
Wonderful.
And should you want to know more about this, slightly shameless plug, but my book will go through everything. Sort your own relationship with food out as well. It's a great gift to your kids.
Yeah. If people want to know more about your work, want to know more about you, want to work with you, how can they find you? How can they get in touch?
So Instagram is probably easiest, or TikTok. I'm at Dr. Anna Colton on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and my website. They're all the same.
Did you write a book or something?
I did. Yes, please. Enjoy my book. It's called How to Talk to Children About Food. It came out 4 days ago, end of last week. It's available in the UK, Australia, New Zealand on Audible and Kindle.
I love an audiobook.
So
I love an audiobook.
Depends how you found listening to me today, because I'm afraid it's my dulcet tones reading that audiobook.
No, I love it. Your accent is like, so it's just like, it's candy, but for my ears.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yes.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Can't wait to see where your work takes you. And I can't wait to start putting this book in the hands of the parents that I meet.
Oh, thank you so much.